debt ceiling. We've done a number of things bipartisan historically in this country. I'll give you three real quick examples. Farm bill has always been bipartisan. The differences are regional more than party. Lugar and I work very well together in the farm bill, but the Louisiana sugar and Arkansas rice farmers have a different, and their senators have a different view of what you do with farm subsidies, right? But we always pass a bipartisan farm bill. We always pass a bipartisan transportation bill. The Tea Party in the House of Representatives pretty much says there should be no federal role in transportation. But how do you build an interstate system? You just without a federal role. And the third one is the debt ceiling. Every time the debt ceiling comes up, whenever the president is the other party, always complains that the president's blowing a hole in the budget, and then gives the president's party enough votes to pass the debt ceiling, never threatening the full faith and credit of the United States of America. Last year, the Tea Party threatened the full faith and credit of the United States of America. It's why we have this fiscal cliff. It's why we have this sequestration and all this. That was their demand. And it froze, a lot of you are in business, and it froze any investment, any new investment that might have happened in this country for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, leading up to the debt ceiling, to puncturing the debt ceiling, if you will. So leading up to that vote, the country's economy sort of stopped, and that's one reason that cost us not insignificant economic growth. I think the way around it is I think that after this election, sorry for letting this answer, after this election, I think that because Barack Obama is not the issue anymore, that both parties will try to start again, and I think that those of us that have reached across the aisle on a number of issues, and I don't bore you with 10 things I've tried to do that way, that have been pretty much successful. But and the other thing will happen, I think the business community will step up and say, you can't do that again to a transportation bill, a debt ceiling bill, a farm bill. I mean, all the farm groups want to move the farm bill. Speaker Boehner can't do it because he's got too much opposition in the Congress. He may not be able to. He may do it after the election. I don't know. But there are things we could do. And we've had worse times in this country. We've had more partisan times, and we've certainly had more, from an economic standpoint, more difficult times. And this is hard as this is. Thank you. I already said this. She obviously writes much more clearly than that. Yes. She grew up in the old Soviet Union. She has her family. She lost members of her family in the Holocaust, as I know far too many people in this room did. And she asked what just friendship with Israel, but especially the threat of nuclear Iran. A couple of answers, and I'll make this one shorter. I'm on the Senate Banking Committee. It was a committee when I got on in 2007. We didn't expect it to have nearly as many issues as it did with what happened to the economy and the Iran issues. We have continued to strengthen and tighten, and I've been part of this on the committee, the sanctions against Iran, and especially now the increasingly tightened sanctions against the Central Bank of Iran and other central banks to deal with the Central Bank of Iran. I'm very concerned about Iran. I think the most important issue, if not our single most important issue, is a national security issue as a nation, speak with intelligence officials and military officials from both countries, both meaning Israel and the United States. We get updates as much as they can tell us. I'm not on the intelligence committee, so I don't have that clearance. A handful of my colleagues have more clearance, and chair of those committees has the most clearance in terms of their exposure and access to intelligence questions. But they talk to us regularly about Iran's progress, or lack of progress towards nuclear weapons. I think that nothing's off the table in terms of our dealings with Iran. I think that one other point, I was, when Senator Byrd died about a year and a half ago, Senator Reid put me on the Appropriations Committee on the first Ohio Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee in over 100 years. And that committee, I asked Senator Reid and the chairman anyway, that committee, if I could go in the Foreign Operations Subcommittee, because the importance to me of maintaining the memorandum of understanding, the $3+ billion a year we dedicate to Middle Eastern peace, the peace process. That's important to me. Foreign aid is generally very important to me. When I say foreign aid is important, I mean to Israel and Egypt. And those questions of Egypt are more complicated now with the less friendly Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood. I fully understand that. And engaging in other ways of national security through foreign aid, and also to me the very, very important part of foreign aid that goes to health care and goes to feeding the poor in Africa and Asia. All of that's important. That's why I certainly share your concern about stability in that region and safety of Israel. I do. I mean, I think that nobody can predict that, but I think enough of the world is putting enough pressure on Iran, having enough impact with the sanctions that I will. And I think they are having enough of it. I am optimistic. I think one of the important parts of this was that the U.S. This is generally not talked about much, but I think when the U.S. when the Senate ratified the START agreement, while Russia has not been our ally very often, I think doing that helped us take a step with Russia. Some would disagree with this. It did hurt us with Russia, but certainly I think it helped embolden the more moderate sort of Medvedev more than Putin, although Putin's obviously a more powerful figure, but I think our START negotiations, our START ratification helped at least try to get the Russians at some point to put more pressure on the Iranians. I mean, China and Russia have not been helpful at all in Iran. We know that. We've got to find a way to do what we're doing with sanctions, what we're doing with all options on the table, and working with China and Russia in other ways to get them to weigh in a little bit better than they have. Not trusting the Russians and the Chinese, but understanding what's in their interest ultimately too. And what's in their interest ultimately too is an Iran that doesn't have nuclear weapons.
Thank you very much for this open forum. I guess for Rabbi's opening words, Brian Willis here to me, I'm Mike Lang from Bexley, Ohio. I guess the question is, what is the biggest mistake that you have made as a senator? And then more importantly, what have you learned?
Taking that question. It took me a while. It took me a while to learn the differences between the two houses. I came out of 14 years in the House. In many ways, I had an advantage over Senate colleagues, other freshmen who had not been in the House. I think I could have adjusted more quickly to the different set of rules. The one difference between the House and the Senate, which was apparent like that fifth day, is in the House, and Joyce has been doing this for a long time, and Susie, in her often trips to Washington, but is that in the House you hire a bunch of 23-year-olds, they're smart as hell, but don't know very much. In the Senate, you get the same people 10 years later. A staff that's really, really smart, but also don't do it for a while. But I think I didn't get some of that transition. And I mean, in the House, everything's in 1 minute segments. You talk about 1 minute. The Senate, it takes senators, it takes 1 minute to clear their throats. I do understand this a lot. You got to learn. If you're in the minority in the House, you don't get much done. It's very hierarchical. And I guess what I've really learned in the Senate is same time in Accident, Texas, I worked with Republicans, senior senator from Texas, came in and Hutchinson. We have good auto safety in this country. We have good airplane safety by and large. The laws of bus safety, road safety, were not very strong. The industry had beaten it back for years. It took us 5 years, and 1 or 2 senators blocked that legislation, and to have that patience and figure out how to go around it and eventually get it. And we did. It was passed. We signed the law, Mark, 6 months ago. Our transportation. And the other thing you look at in the Senate is, you introduced me. If you look at the bills I introduced and saw how many of those bills were signed into law, it wouldn't be very many. But if you look at the bills I introduced and then followed their course, that S 2936 ended up as part of the Veterans Vow to Hire Heroes Act, or ended up part of the transportation bill. So the provisions we wrote became law. They just weren't in that legislation. That's what you really do in the Senate. I didn't quite get that now.
Finally, I know Ohio State has their whole policy there, so I'm interested at Ohio State, and so I'm interested in healthcare even as their whole policy. What I'm interested in is, whoever wins the bill, one way or the other in Congress, I guess there's going to maybe be a attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and I want to get your opinion on how that comes over. There's really any portions of the ACA that might be repealed. The other part of my question also about Ohio is what you think about Ohio not moving forward or certain people with respect to health insurance discussions.
The question was, what happens after the election with either changes or outright repeal of healthcare law, and what do I think of the state government's resistance to implementing any more than they have to implement? I think there's no chance it will be repealed, even if Romney wins, it will not be repealed. Too many of us in the Senate will fight too hard and stop it because it was the right thing to do. It was the most important vote I've ever cast in my life, and it was the best vote I've ever cast in my life. And I don't run for that. And I'll give you, you know this, but 3 or 4 really important examples. 1.2 million seniors in Ohio already are getting checkups and getting with no copay or deductible. 200,000 Ohioans seniors have already saved $600 in the average in drug costs. That coverage gap done at home. Tens of thousands of families that have a diabetic child or asthmatic child still have health care insurance company because of strong consumer protection laws. You can't strike them from their coverage. You can't strike those families. You get really sick and you might have had your insurance canceled. And another day they can't cancel your insurance again because of these strong consumer protection laws. A whole lot of things like that, as you know, because you teach them. But it hasn't yet seen that. I think this law will be as popular 10 years from now as Medicare is. I mean, Medicare, I did a lot of reading during that process of sort of that history. Medicare had a lot of the same opposition to insurance companies, the doctors were more mixed this time. We didn't have the Tea Party at the John Birch Society. It wasn't much different in the 60s and 2010. And by and large, we're moving forward on it. There will be some changes at the margin. We may discuss the IPAB, the independent panel, the payment advisory board. There may be some slight changes there. I doubt many. There was already a couple of changes to some small business issues. I think we need to tune in to 2 things, especially as it rolls out. One is what happens to small businesses and companies that are right on the edge of the size of 50 employees, and where they go, and are they dropping coverage, and why, and what do we do to keep them? And I think second, generally, what happens with the cost of healthcare generally? The cost of healthcare generally, are we able to get that more under control with this law? This law will do some significant things that way with cost controls, cost containment. And third, as more and more hospitals spend a lot of money now taking care of people that they don't get compensation for, so-called uncompensated care. And those hospitals absorb a whole lot of costs, especially if they're near Appalachia or inner city, Columbus or Cleveland or whatever. And there is something in the healthcare law now called a disproportionate share, where a lot of money goes to those hospitals to make up for their covering so many uninsured patients. We want to shrink disproportionate share payments as the number of insured people show up for care. So they're going into the hospital, they're paying customers now, so the hospital's disproportionate share dollars need to come down. We've got to make sure that disproportionate share is not cut too precipitously and not made up for by the new people that come into the healthcare system, that is, as insured patients. Yes.
Thank you. Dennis Egan, the senator remembered my name, and I thank him for it. A sign of a good politician to remember a face and a name. I came here for one purpose. The senator didn't know I was going to be here. I came here to sing his praise. I'm serious. I am one of the few sailors from Vietnam to have multiple Agent Orange disabilities. Multiple. There are tens of thousands of others who haven't. Came back from Vietnam in '67. 1985, I started to show up with problems from Agent Orange. The first thing that the VA said was, no! No! I wouldn't accept that. Medically and scientifically, I showed the VA was wrong. It was cost containment. I contacted the senator. He had me contact some of his staff. They helped me. I have 4 Agent Orange disabilities, a hepatitis C disability, and 100% VA disability, and probably from the help that the senator gave me by saying, pay attention to what he is telling you. Thank you. You have a good man to bring you down. Go for it.
Let me return the compliment that way, because he came today. I very much appreciate that. He also came to talk to me about a bill that probably won't help him, but it will help other people that will be exposed to Agent Orange, because we'll go into great detail. My wife has written a really good piece. She went to Vietnam and wrote about what Agent Orange is still doing.
I had that article at home.
Okay.
I could use it.
You should have come today and held it up. Really. But real briefly, just I think it's important that we all, particularly of that generation, should understand a bit better than I used to, for sure, too, is we were able to get the VA, and General Shinseki and Congress, to get the VA to do something called presumptive eligibility. If your boots were on the ground in Vietnam, and then you had an illness that you couldn't prove was as a result of Agent Orange, it was presumed that it was because you were actually on the ground in Vietnam. If you were a sailor, though, and didn't actually have boots on the ground in the country of Vietnam, you still might have been exposed, but you were not included in that presumptive eligibility. Yeah. And that's what he's got some legislation. My Senate colleague from New York and a House member from California, both Democrats, are pushing for, and Mark Plowman, staff was here, you should all know, by the way, Mark, will work with you on that and others. So thank you for bringing that issue to
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Steve Worth. Thank you, Senator, for being here. My question is more about a tax-related question. For those people who make over $250,000, for those of us who make over $200,000, whoever they need, the presumption, it appears to me, is that $250,000 and over is kind of discretionary, and that's for people they can afford to pay that tax, whether you make $500,000 or $270,000. And for many people, it's not discretionary. And I guess more to the point is, when we hear the president say these people should do more of their fair share, isn't that kind of an us versus them mentality? And something that the president, and I'm assuming you believe this tax policy, and isn't that more of a divisive nature, something that the president, when he was running for election, kind of said we want to be more inclusive? And so with this kind of together, it appears to me that you're dividing people, and in fact, isn't it this extra revenue that you'll get really not going to make a dent in everything you get, and it's more of an institutional problem that you say government clearly is kind of on line here?
I appreciate your thoughtful comments on that. First of all, if you make $270,000, you are only paying a higher tax on the $250,000 in first dollar. And second, the tax rate is only going to be raised to what it was in the Clinton years, which is not. It's a few percent. So somebody making $300,000 is going to pay only a few thousand. I'll get to the rhetoric in a section. It's only going to pay a few thousand more than they would have previously. And I look back at the Clinton years. I mean, I this sounds partisan. I apologize. It's not meant to. But from '93 to 2000, I voted for the Clinton budget. It passed with no Republican votes. John Kasich actually said, if this works, I'll switch parties. Between 1993 and 2000, we saw 21, and it's not only because of this, but I think you can't ignore it. We saw 21 million net increased private sector jobs in that 8 years. And we had the biggest budget surplus in American history with people paying a little higher rate. But I don't think people object to paying a higher rate, a little higher if the economy is going well. Between 2001 and 2008, and you can take it 2 years longer if you wanted, in the Obama years, we had a 1 million private sector job growth, net increase. 1 million versus 22 million. And when President Bush left office, we had the biggest budget deficit in American history and much lower tax, significantly lower tax rates. So I think, I know it sounds to some that the president's engaging in class warfare, although you could quote Warren Buffett, who said, yeah, there's class warfare in this country, and my class won. You can certainly say that, it's disturbing to me that the increased chasm between the wealthiest in this country, and I don't want to play the 1%, 99% thing, but a relatively small number of people have done increasingly better, relatively small. I don't think you tax that and even it out. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think that when I hear the sort of partisan rhetoric aimed at Barack Obama, everything from where he was born and those issues, and his Muslim, and he's both a Muslim and he's a crazy left-wing Christian at the same time with his Chicago pastor. I get that. But then I hear people say, well, he's engaged in class warfare. The president, the fact that, what bothers me, the fact that very few people on Wall Street were ever really punished for what happened. The president talked kind of nasty about him, but nobody on Wall Street really paid much of the price, and most of the economic gains, unfortunately, in the last 2 years, we lost 5 million manufacturing jobs from 2000 to 2010 in this country, 5 million. Since 2010, we gained back about 500,000. But that's progress, because we hadn't gained manufacturing jobs in 12 years. But it's not nearly enough. And I'll give you one other number that, and a lot of you are financial services here, a lot of people that I'm pretty close to here in that. But we had from 30 years ago, our GDP was about 27% manufacturing, about 10% financial services. Now it's the reverse. I don't think either one was quite where we ought to be, but we don't put the emphasis there as much as we should. That's off the subject, but the rhetoric's always a little heated. It's particularly heated now, but I think the president's right that, I don't think your last point that it's not a lot of money in the end, but nothing's a lot. If we're going to solve this budget deficit, $23 billion we save with my legislation on ending farm subsidies, well, that's not very much. $23 billion out of $1 trillion, why bother? Everything's part of it. And I think raising tax rates back to the Clinton era, you know what they were in the Eisenhower era. Eisenhower actually raised the top tax rate. It was over 90%. I was talking to Jay Rockefeller about that floor one day. I said, the only people who paid 90% was like your family. He laughed. Nobody's advocating 50, 60, 70, but it was 90, then it was brought down by Kennedy to 70, and then brought down by Carter to 50, and then brought down by Reagan to 27 or 8. I'm not arguing for 50 even, but I think it can be a little bit higher than it is now for many of us in this room, and I'll pay more, and many of these room will pay more. I think we can afford to pay a little more. I understand the rhetoric, and we hope we can soften that, but I understand when a bunch of people in one political party sign a pledge to a super lobbyist named Grover Norquist that they will never increase taxes, and that means they won't close loopholes for the auto companies, means they won't close any loopholes for outsourcing jobs, then there is a very difficult, your question, Mr. Wood, there is a very difficult dysfunction, intractable problem that we've got to bring our way through. Thanks for your question.
My question is Professor Klein about healthcare. Several years ago, I know you were looking into taking Social Security numbers off of Medicare cards, and what's happened with that? I'm now one of those folks, and when I had private insurance, obviously I would have to have my
question was, your Social Security number is on your Medicare card, and you're told to carry your Medicare card, which is just inviting identity theft. We had a bill, I mean, it had to be an act of Congress, it couldn't be done, legislation couldn't be done by the administration, not act of Congress. It was about 3 years ago, going with this part, we had one guy object to doing it, so we weren't successful, and nothing's happened administratively since, right? So we'll try to get, I mean, it's really silly, because it's one of those things that doesn't, it's just sort of counterintuitive. Thank you. You already had one on that.
Senator, my name is Jack Levy. Along the lines of learning from our mistakes, I'd like to apologize to Dr. Reagan and thank him for his service. I started my political activism in Chicago, going door to door in 1968 for George McGovern. You mentioned partisanship, and I think that's a very important topic. Senator, I'm scared. Support for Israel used to be a reliable, bipartisan issue. At this year's Democratic convention, reliable planks from previous platforms. The plank that said Israel should not be forced to negotiate with Hamas because Hamas is a terrorist organization dedicated to Israel's destruction. The plank saying that Israel was our most important ally in the region and must have military superiority were eliminated. The plank recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital was eliminated and was restored only after great controversy by a questionable voice vote and with significant booing from the floor for those of you who were present or who saw the videotape. We have an administration whose official spokesman refuses to say that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. First, what can be done to reduce the partisanship over this issue? And second, along those lines, is there anything that would make you reconsider your initial opposition to the security barrier that has saved the lives of countless Israelis, both Jewish and Arab, from suicide bombers? And is there anything that would make you reconsider your signature of a letter, along with other senators, opposing Israel's embargo of Gaza, an embargo that in fact was recognized even by the UN as being lawful? And do you endorse the President's insistence in defiance of UN Resolution 242, which calls for secure and recognized borders, that Israel return to the indefensible armistice lines of 1949, erroneously sometimes called the 1967 borders, with only minor adjustments? Thank you.
I don't go to the course. Let me start in Jerusalem. I didn't agree with that Democratic plank. I also know that every time there's an election, both parties say that we want Jerusalem to be recognized as the capital of Israel, and neither party ever does anything about it once they're president. So, blame George Bush, blame Bill Clinton. I just don't think that. I understand the symbolism of it. I've been to Jerusalem a number of times. I understand the importance of it. I know the volatility of it. The Dome of the Rock is the center in many ways of three religions. At least three religions say that. So I understand all that. I think that at the risk of sounding partisan on the other side, I think that a number of Republicans are trying to divide. A number of Republicans are trying to divide Israel. I don't want to talk about my race, but my opponent goes all over the country and says I'm anti-Israel. Then why am I getting so much help from AIPAC?
But sir, you are also getting significant support from J Street, which most people in the pro-Israel community recognize is an anti-Israel organization masquerading as a pro-Israel.
Jack, that's not
The
true.
majority of people in the Jewish community do recognize that. I think that's a difference between. I'm proud to be supported by AIPAC, and they will tell you, including the former national president of AIPAC, Tim Muller, Connie and I went to Israel with him and Sandy and a number of others, will tell you that Sherrod is a strong voice for Israel every single time. So I'm not going to pick on each one of those, but I think there is the Tom DeLays of the world are trying to divide on foreign policy. You remember the Republican effort to break off. This to me was a fairly insidious thing. The Republican, the far right, not Main Street Republicans, wherever Main Street Republicans sit now, were willing to bifurcate Israel-Egypt money, peace process money, from all other foreign aid. And AIPAC, to its credit, J Street didn't exist then, stood up and said, no, you can't do that because the faith, if you're a Jew, and I'm not, of course, but if you're a Jew, you believe in helping the poor as much as you believe in helping the Middle East peace process. But that's what Republicans wanted to do. They wanted to divide that support and make that very, very partisan. It started with Gingrich and Tom DeLay, and we fought back. And I had real trouble with a foreign aid bill that only spoke to Israel and Egypt. I wanted a foreign aid bill that spoke to Israel and Egypt, yes, but also dealt with malaria, AIDS, TB, and all of that. So the partisanship is gone all different places. But this president of the United States is very pro-Israel. I think our relations between our intelligence forces and Israel's intelligence forces are stronger than they've ever been. I think the cooperation between our military and the IDF are stronger than they've ever been. And I think you could be fearful of a lot of things, and I'm fearful of what could happen with Iran. But don't be fearful about Democrats standing up and being friends of Israel. I just don't like it.
Didn't answer any of your three questions.
You decide what you think.
What
do you guys want?
Yeah, okay. Well, that was an interesting conversation. First, we're going to say John here to ask the questions. In Barack Obama's biography, he states that he chose his friends carefully. And then he went to a list of Marxist professors and anti-colonial poets and other things. Fine. My question to you is, do you also choose your friends carefully? And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about J Street, because J Street has in fact put forward a series of positions, a number of them mentioned by the previous questioner, that are very arguably anti-Israel. And when you add that together I thought, forgive me, you sort of brushed aside Barack Obama's relationship with Israel. Only recently he said that Israel is one of our closest allies in the Middle East, dropping the old formulation, which is that it is one of our closest allies in the world and our closest ally in the Middle East. And so I'd like to know from you, who are our other closest allies in the Middle East? And do you agree with Barack Obama's tendency to allow there to be daylight between Israel and America?
I don't think there is daylight. I don't agree with those assumptions. First of all, I don't agree with your assumptions about J Street. I understand it. I know there's a bunch of J Street members here too in this crowd, but I also understand some of you are both J Street and AIPAC. And whatever my relations with J Street have been, I'm proud of them. I would have had events all over this country where AIPAC members have called me up and said, I want to help you with your campaign for re-election, even against a Jewish opponent. I would have had that. So I did, and I think that answers that question. In terms of the president's comments, I don't know. Presidents say a lot of things. My guess is you might have, if you had looked really carefully, you might have found something that George W. Bush said that was stupid too. You might have. Just a guess.
Is he right?
Bush, just because Bush talks, I don't want to go into this, except to say that.
Are you saying
No, I'm just saying the president. I don't. Well, first saying that the president of the United States, I don't believe there's daylight between the U.S. and Israel. I believe he thinks Israel is our most important ally in the Mideast. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't know any serious-minded elected official in either party that thinks anything other than that. I think he thinks that. I don't believe. I don't. He might have said that once, but I don't believe he. I don't think that's what he normally says. And I think that he understands that Israel is one of our, I don't think, is Israel more important to us than Great Britain? I don't know. Or is Israel more important to us than Mexico? I don't know how you make those judgments, but Israel is our most important ally in the Middle East, period, end of story. And I believe every candidate for president in both parties believes that. I think President Obama believes it. But most importantly, look at what we've done with I think, making the world safer, but also making what we've done with the cooperation, most importantly, between the IDF and DOD in this country, the cooperation between Israeli intelligence and the CIA in our country. And I think those are the real proof in the pudding that he is serious about that allegiance. Presidents talk a lot, they say a lot of things. I can't defend everything he says. I don't agree with everything he says. I don't think he's stupid ever. I think he's a very smart man. But I also know that he's doing his best, and Israel is very, very important to him. I know it's popular in the far right to try to drive that wedge between the president and Israel. I don't think it's a fair wedge to drive. I think he is very supportive of the country of Israel, the relationship with Israel and the United States, and with fighting terrorists.